strengthened to a Category 2 hurricane early this afternoon with maximum sustained winds of 100 miles per hour. The system is expected to rapidly intensify and could become a powerful Category 3 hurricane before it makes landfall tomorrow. Idalia is expected to make landfall between 6 and 9 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, south of Perry, Florida. In the state's Big Bend area, forecasters are warning of a record-breaking storm surge of 10 to 15 feet. The Tampa area, 200 miles south of where Idalia is expected to make landfall, could see damaging storm surge early tomorrow. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis activated the National Guard. President Joe Biden approved an emergency declaration. Georgia and South Carolina declared states of emergency. We'll continue to keep our eye on that as it makes landfall in Florida. But moving from Florida to North Carolina, where a graduate student at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, was charged with first-degree murder after the fatal shooting of a professor in his research department. The murder charge carries a punishment of a life sentence without parole. Jeff Neiman, the district attorney for Chatham and Orange counties, said after Tuesday's hearing that he would not seek the death penalty. Now off to Michigan, where the Michigan Republican Party is starving for cash. A group of prominent activists, including a former statewide candidate, was hit in the mouth with felony charges connected to a bizarre plot to hijacking election machines. And in the face of these troubles, suspicions and infighting have been running high. A recent state committee led to a fist fight, a spinal injury, and a pair of shattered dentures. This turmoil is one measure of the way Donald J. Trump's lies about the 2020 election have rippled through his party. And a Georgia school district canceled an author's talk after he said gay. An elementary school principal in Forsyth County emailed parents to apologize last week after Mark Tyler Nobleman used the word in a presentation about the origins of Batman. The Biden administration Tuesday identified 10 expensive prescription drugs it's chosen for price negotiations with pharmaceutical manufacturers as the government seeks to ease the financial burden on older and disabled Americans. The announcement marks an unprecedented step in a long political war over the nation's exorbitant drug costs, even as the pharmaceutical industry is still trying to block the plan. Down in Florida, Miami Mayor Francis Suarez is ending his long-shot 2024 presidential campaign less than 3 months after he launched it. Suarez, the only Hispanic candidate in the GOP nominating contest, launched his campaign in mid-June, later than most of his now former rivals. Last week, he failed to qualify for the first Republican debate after falling short of the necessary polling requirements. And Mark Meadows struggles to distance himself from Trump's plot. One lesson from the proceedings is that Trump's co-defendants are going to struggle. They're going to struggle to distance themselves from the alleged conspiracy. Meadows repeatedly argued that he was merely doing his duty as a very involved chief of staff who needed to be abreast of what the president was doing. While he participated in many key events, he often played down his proximity to the effort to overturn the election. And in Tennessee, the Tennessee House Republicans majority voted Monday to temporarily silence a Democratic lawmaker who is a member of the Tennessee Three after he expressed skepticism about the draft bill proposed to install armed police at schools, even if those institutions had not adopted such a policy. This is Areva Martin in real time. I'm Dr. Nicordelai Corte, filling in for Areva, who will be right back here on Thursday. But just a reminder, this is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and unfiltered opinions. In this hour, we'll be joined with Nick Wilson, Senior Director for Gun Violence Prevention at the Center for American Progress, and Terrence J. Evans, Director of Region 11 of the National Bar Association. Region 9 of the National Bar Association. Now, before I bring my guest on, here's what I'm thinking in real time. We've talked about the threat of white supremacy violence. We've talked about the threat of gun violence in this country. There are certainly too many stories and too many examples of such violence that is afoot across the country. And I can't seem to get the victims of the Jacksonville shooting out of my mind. And maybe part of it is because this weekend I was covering the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. I was in DC, steps from the Lincoln Memorial, interviewing a number of change makers and civil rights leaders from across the country, many of which who spoke at the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington from the main stage. And just the contrast between that experience there, the history of that moment, a moment that changed the world, a moment that humanized the lives of Black people and the character of all people of conscience. And fast forward to 2023, we're down in Jacksonville, Florida. There's a white supremacist who shot and killed 3 Black people at a Jacksonville Dollar General store. A general store. The lives of people that were simply doing their daily routines like you and me. And so I just wanted to take a moment out and speak the names of the victims of that violence. Anolt A.J. LaGuerre Jr., 19. He started working at the Dollar General to make some change in his pocket. Gerald Deshaun Gallen, 29, was a devoted father and co-parent. And Angela Michelle Carr, 52, was an Uber driver, simply dropping off a passenger at the Dollar General store. It's on us to decide when enough is enough. I know that so many of you probably grow tired and weary hearing us report on stories like this, headlines like this, families that have been completely disrupted by violence like this. But clearly, a lot of people in positions of power, influence, and authority in Washington and in state houses across the country have not decided that enough is enough. And it's on us to help them to decide enough is enough. And in that spirit, I'm glad that we have an incredible advocate and an incredible litigator on this hour to help us make sense out of this story and so much more. You're listening to Areva Martin in real time, more with our guests, Nick Wilson and Terrence J. Evans, when we come forward.
Gotta stay fresh, ma. Don't shout with a rest bar.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
The bounce is back.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head. Yeah.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search. We are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me, on me, on me, on me, on me, on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580.
Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is Unapologetically Progressive.
You are listening and streaming Areva Martin in real time. I'm Dr. Nicordelai Corte right here on KBLA Talk 1580. You can typically find me on A More Perfect Union. I moderate that show as I also serve as Chief National Political Analyst for KBLA Talk 1580. And so if it's Sunday on the 10s, that means 10 a.m. Pacific or 10 p.m. Pacific. You should be tuning in to KBLA Talk 1580 where you can hear A More Perfect Union. But today, I'm filling in for Areva Martin in real time. And in good company, I'm joined by Nick Wilson, the Senior Director for Gun Violence Prevention at the Center for American Progress. Also, Terrence J. Evans, Director of Region 9 of the National Bar Association. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Great to be here.
Well, thank you for being here. And, first things first, Jacksonville has been heavy on my mind. I have a feeling it's been heavy on your mind. I want to ask you, Nick, to reflect on some of the comparisons that folks are drawing between the white supremacist violence that we've seen in Jacksonville. It's being investigated as a federal hate crime. And right away, like so many folks, you and me both, thought of what happened in Buffalo. We thought of the manifesto that was left behind there and has often been left behind by white supremacists, committing such violence. And so talk to us about the comparisons between Jacksonville and Buffalo, not just in terms of what happened, but in terms of the action that these events have inspired thus far.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're hate crimes and violence motivated by bias are at an all-time high and growing. So my team was actually already looking at the latest statistics on hate crimes and the intersection with gun violence last week before the shooting. And we were thinking about all the many tragic shootings against the Jewish community, against the LGBTQ community, against Latino communities. But really, we've noticed that the most hate crimes are committed against the Black community. And unfortunately, we're starting to see these real patterns. And it's almost becoming predictable. These young white supremacists, usually radicalized online, they do their research and go out of their way to find areas with as many Black people as possible. The weapon of choice is an assault rifle, both in Buffalo and in Jacksonville. They drove quite far to find an area, the predominantly Black neighborhood. They used an assault rifle with swastikas hand-painted on the barrels. They would have a tactical bulletproof vest so they could take down as many people as possible using latex gloves. And they would leave behind these racist manifestos. Clearly, that made it very clear to law enforcement right away what their motivation was. It's really a really rising concern that there's this online radicalization, there's this hate across the country, and at the same time, we're loosening gun laws in states like Florida and Texas and making it easier for anyone to get their hands on guns, even though they pose a risk to their communities. So it's been really heartbreaking to see that Jacksonville will be going through the same years of trauma and recovery that Buffalo has, who's still hurting and still feels like their community is different and won't be changed, and asking the federal government for more resources and investments, because it can devastate entire communities, especially when it's targeted against a particular community.
And we're not just loosening gun laws across the country, but we're also erasing history. We are really censoring our curriculum across the country. Terrence, just earlier, you reminded us that it's not just the curriculum in places like Florida that are going after Black history, but there are 28 states and counting across the country that are following Florida's lead in the wrong direction on issues related to Black history in school curriculums, but that are a part of the momentum that's driving this movement against all things related to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Absolutely. UCLA Law School has actually been tracking this, and I've been paying close attention to this as I've traveled around the country talking about racial justice. And as you mentioned, 28 states have followed Florida's lead in banning the teaching of Black history as it actually happening, banning diversity, equity, and inclusion training. It's even bled into some of the blue states. In California, there are 2 school districts that have followed suit, Orange County and Paso Robles County. And you see this wave of anti-Black education and curriculum and legislation, everything from the affirmative action decision to now attacking employment of African Americans at law firms. You may have seen the recent lawsuits against Perkins Coie and also Morrison and Foerster for their diversity and recruitment programs that target African Americans and Hispanics. So you see this wave of anti-Blackness overtaking the country, fueled in part by some of the politics on the right, to be quite candid. And it really fosters these anti-Black sentiments that inspire some of these people who are misdirected to go and enact physical violence against our community. So we really have to look at this not only from the physical violence, but the erasing of our education, because when you're able to dehumanize people by not understanding their history and where they come from, it makes it easier for people to then act in a violent manner.
Do you think that our elected leaders are doing enough to sort of shore up where we can, if we can't sort of blunt, legislation, aimed at really complicating our history, if not erasing it outright?
I don't think our elected leaders are doing enough, but I think that this is something that's bigger than what our elected leaders, especially in the red states, can accomplish. It's really going to take our entire community and all of our allies to fight and demand that our history not be erased, and to take personal responsibility for educating our young people so that the history that really made us who we are is not forgotten. I was at the African American Museum last week. I went there 3 times. I spent 15 hours there. So much rich history that I didn't know, and I'm a student of Black history. I think we have to do everything possible to make sure that we preserve this history and educate people about the hardships that we've overcome to get to where we are today.
And speaking of folks who are doing everything possible, the Michigan Republican Party, they're starving for cash, but a group of prominent activists, including a former statewide candidate, was hit this month with felony charges connected to a bizarre plot to hijack election machines. And in the face of these troubles, suspicions, and infighting, that's been running pretty high. And a recent state committee meeting led to a fist fight, spinal injury, and a pair of shattered dentures. That's how serious it's getting in Michigan. The turmoil is one measure of the way Donald J. Trump's lies about the 2020 election have rippled through his party. I've got to ask you, Nick, the GOP presidential debate last week really put on full display, people that I assume are sort of the standard bearers right now in the Republican Party, with the exception of Donald Trump, the former president, who did not participate in that debate. But to what extent is what's happening in Michigan, the infighting that's happening in Michigan, to what extent might it be a sign, that, there is a movement afoot around accountability in the Republican Party, particularly in a very important swing state like Michigan? To what extent is there reason for cautious optimism, if any? And Nick may have some trouble with his audio, but I want to go to Terrence and ask you your take on that.
Absolutely. Well, what we see here is a bit of irony, because many of the folks on the right have pushed these voter suppression laws. We've seen the U.S. Supreme Court, from the Shelby County decision to some of the more recent decisions, eroding the Voting Rights Act and access to the ballot box for communities of color, while at the same time, these same communities are unwilling to accept the results of legitimate elections. We see what's happening with the former president of the United States and all of the folks who are his co-conspirators who were indicted in Fulton County, Georgia, where they are actually the ones who are trying to interfere with legitimate elections while making it harder for the rest of us. I think the silver lining here is that we're seeing accountability. And this is what happens when you have people in positions of power, from Fani Lewis to the Attorney General of the state of Michigan, who are in positions of power to enact and to enforce legislation that will protect the integrity of our elections.
And should we be connecting the dots between some of the violence that's happening even within the Michigan Republican Party? I mean, I just said, that a committee meeting, tensions in a committee meeting led to a fist fight, a spinal injury, and a pair of shattered dentures. And I can't help but just sort of think about, the demonstrations of violence, that have become, commonplace, right? And so whether we're talking about, a white supremacist leaving a manifesto in places like Jacksonville, or we're talking about a white supremacist, going after, Black folks, in a supermarket or a church or what have you, right? Or, we're seeing, somebody that was inspired, by the MAGA movement, sort of allegedly bludgeon, Nancy Pelosi's husband in their home. But we're just seeing so many demonstrations of violence, oftentimes with firearms involved. Nick, are we wise to connect the dots, between, the rhetoric and these demonstrations of violence, especially when, in many cases, guns are involved?
That's exactly right. And at Center for American Progress, we really try to take an interdisciplinary approach, because political violence and threats to our democracy and white supremacy and firearm violence are all interrelated. Just today, Representative Justin Jones, one of the Tennessee Three, he was silenced again. And then one of the Republican congressmen put his shoulder into him and hit him with his shoulder. Before January 6th, insurrectionists armed with firearms tried to kidnap the Governor Whitmer, and we've seen more and more political violence and more politicians using rhetoric and using firearms and shooting their opponents' photos in their campaign ads. No wonder more of their followers are going out and committing political violence on their behalf. And if we don't start addressing the role of social media and tech and online in radicalization and leading hate speech into violence, then we're going to have more of these type of tragedies, more of these conversations.
When we come forward, I want to pick up on that thread, and I want to get your take, on the role of social media companies in all of this. There's been a constant tension between hate speech and free speech, and at what point does moderating that speech drift over towards censorship? And if we can't figure that out, what can we do? What can our social media companies do better to protect folks, particularly Black folks, LGBTQ folks, women who tend to be first in line when it comes to these demonstrations of hate and the white supremacy and the focus of white supremacy violence. And so more when we come forward. You're listening to Areva Martin in real time. I'm Dr. Nicolai Corte, and I'm joined with Nick Wilson from the Center for American Progress and Terrence J. Evans from the National Bar Association.
Follow the leader. KBLA Talk 1580. Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
Bounce is back.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
I'm young, gifted, and black.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Connection established. Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black. Your black. Your black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader. Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar, shot with a rest bar.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time. I'm Dr. Nicordelai Corte, host of A More Perfect Union and Chief National Political Analyst for KBLA Talk 1580, filling in for Areva, who will be right back right here on Thursday. But in the meantime, I'm in the best of company with Nick Wilson, Senior Director for Gun Violence Prevention at the Center for American Progress. Also, Terrence J. Evans, Director of Region 9 of the National Bar Association. We've been talking, a lot about the interconnectedness between some of the white supremacy violence that we're seeing, not just in the headlines, but we're seeing, sort of surge here in the country. The connection between white supremacy violence, the availability of guns, and the gun violence that we're seeing across the country, and the anti-Black, anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion movement that is ratcheting up. All of that happening while just this weekend there's a major march on Washington. In fact, it was the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. And, it's not lost on me, it's not lost on you, it's not lost on our listeners. The contrast, between that moment 60 years ago that really changed the history of this country. And fast forward to 60 years where we're at right now, where we're seeing backsliding happening in real time. I think it was Coretta Scott King who said it is the job of every generation to win civil and human rights, right? They're not permanent, right? It's every generation has to do their part to secure civil and human rights. I want to invite you both to sort of reflect on the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. Do a look back and a look forward, considering what we are up against. Terrence?
So I think we're in the most critical moments of our lives in American history as it relates to civil rights. And I think that we are going to have to fight to preserve our history, our legacy, our future, because I think there has been an erosion that many people don't necessarily fully recognize. When we look at the affirmative action decision, I co-authored the amicus brief that was written on behalf of 25 California organizations. And what we saw what happened when California eliminated affirmative action was a decrease in enrollment of about 50% of Black and Brown people in colleges, universities, law schools, dental schools, engineering, you name it. And I'm afraid that we will have a similar type of erosion of enrollment all across the country. We also see the erosion of voting rights, the elimination of our history. And if you don't understand the struggles that African Americans have had as it related to the Homestead Act that was denied to us, the more than 30 plus massacres of Black neighborhoods, the denial of benefits under the GI Bill and Social Security, the denial of access to public schools that our tax dollars paid for, you don't have the correct frame of reference to understand why there is a disparity in the wealth gap between the Black community and the white community. So by erasing our history, essentially, these folks are trying to dehumanize us. We have to fight against that. We have to take personal responsibility for it. We have to do everything we can to protect our future.
And someone who was on the front lines of that fight to protect and preserve our future was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., among so many other civil rights leaders of his era. And it's not lost on me that we lost one of the greatest leaders that our country has seen, one of the greatest leaders that the world has ever seen. I mean, still today, he is the youngest person to ever win a Nobel Prize. Can you imagine that? And Dr. King was 39 years old when he was assassinated. It's not lost on me that we lost this great leader to gun violence, right? And so, the issue of gun violence is certainly not new. And certainly, the Black community and Americans in general have paid such a heavy price because of our unwillingness and inability to curb the threat of gun violence, to curb the threat of political violence that we're seeing too many more examples of today. I've got to ask you, Nick, how are you reflecting on the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington?
One of the things that makes me proud to work at the Center for American Progress is that racial equity and racial justice is not just one team or department, but it's part of everything we do. One of our biggest priorities is shrinking that wealth gap that Terrence mentioned. And I think that would do so much to reduce gun violence as much as passing our stronger gun laws. For our team, we realize that we're not going to be able to wrest our way out of this problem, and we need to pass stronger gun laws, but we can't do it on the backs of overcriminalization. And we need to embrace Dr. King's teaching of coming together and addressing poverty and addressing the root causes, making sure people have excellent housing and education and opportunities. Because right now, I taken this call from my apartment in Baltimore where they invented three-tier redlining, and we spend more per capita on police, and we have decent gun laws, and we're still losing young leaders every day and community leaders every day to gun violence. And so, there's so much to be concerned about, whether it's threats to democracy or climate or women's rights or all these things. But I'm optimistic that if we come together and build that coalition, that we'll be able to finally have reason and make our community safer and thrive and be more vibrant.
And speaking of Dr. King, speaking of the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, speaking of threats to our democracy, it's also not lost on me that one of the chief architects of the March on Washington was Bayard Rustin. And there's a big film that's coming out in a few months, brought to us by Netflix, brought to us by the Obama's production company, Higher Grants, their first feature film. It's called Rustin. Rustin was a proud Black gay man, full stop. And cut to Georgia, where a school district canceled an author's talk after he said gay. An elementary school principal in Forsyth County emailed parents to apologize last week after Mark Tyler Nobleman used the word in a presentation about the origins of Batman. And so if you can't use the word gay, then think about how many of our leaders, how many hidden figures will be buried in time if folks on the right have their way. And so, Terrence, I've got to ask you, are you aware of any sort of, legal advocacy that is afoot to push back against these don't say gay laws that are making their way through legislatures across the country, that are becoming law, that are becoming, standard practice? Are you aware of any litigation efforts that are afoot that our listeners should know about?
Yes, and I think it's quite fitting that you mentioned Baird Rustin. I actually hosted a Juneteenth Pride event that highlighted the great contributions of Baird Rustin. If it had not been for him, there would not have been the Martin Luther King that we've all come to know, because in addition to the March on Washington, he was behind so much of the infrastructure, from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and many of the boycotts. I would say that in addition to litigation efforts, which are important, and they're taking place with great organizations like the ACLU and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Bailiff, which is the largest LGBTQ bar association in the country, is also involved in that. It's also important to be involved at the local level as it relates to these school districts, because that's really where a lot of the change is happening, not just in the courtrooms, but in the boards of education, in the school districts that our children go to. So we have to start at the ground level and kind of work our way through the various city, county, and states, because that is where the resistance to, LGBTQ, Black history, and so forth is happening.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I cut my teeth in LA politics working as a staffer to an LA school board member. And so I think a lot of people, set their sights on Congress and the Senate and the presidency. And those are important offices that make a material difference in our daily lives, but so do school boards. The policies that they approve, the budgets that they approve and don't approve, especially coming out of the darkest days of the pandemic, where so many of our young people are now playing catch up. The work of school boards is critically important. And who gets it? Moms for Liberty. They get it because about 50% of the folks that they endorsed last election cycle actually won their races. And, Moms for Liberty, I'm not going to say that they got a MAGA agenda, but I'm going to say that their agenda looks a little Trumpy to me. That's all I'm saying. And more with what my guests are saying, more with Nick Wilson from the Center for American Progress and Terrence J. Evans from the National Bar Association. When we come forward, you're listening to Areva Martin in real time.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
I'm young, gifted, and black. And KBLA KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Connection established. Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time. I'm Dr. Nicordelai Corte here with Nick Wilson, Senior Director for Gun Violence Prevention at the Center for American Progress, and Terrence J. Evans, Director of Region 9 of the National Bar Association. Just during the break, we were talking about, what's at stake in this election cycle. And, there are a number of folks out there that start to pay very close attention to who's running for president or running for re-election. And that's important. The presidency makes a material difference in our lives. There's clearly a big difference between having President Biden and Vice President Harris in office versus, what we had before. We can feel the difference. And that's important. But there are other offices, non-federal offices, that also make a material difference in our lives. I'd mentioned earlier that, I cut my teeth in LA politics out of college as a staffer to an LA school board member and learned up close and personal, how much of an impact the decisions of our school boards have on the quality of education of our students, the impact that it has in terms of students being able to see themselves in the course curriculum, their impact in terms of, the teachers that get hired and sort of the bad apple teachers, that get removed. They make a big difference, and Moms for Liberty, a conservative group who is gaining a lot of traction. They understand that, but I'm hard pressed to think of, a group on the left, that packs the same punch, as Moms for Liberty. And so, Terrence, you were going to share earlier, not just why this 2024 election cycle will be so consequential, but, help us sort of, reshape our thinking, reshape our priorities, around how we as activists, some of us donor activists, might think about this cycle differently.
Absolutely. So many of the civil rights setbacks that we've had recently, whether it's women's reproductive rights or affirmative action or voting rights and the erosion of the Civil Rights Act, have been as a result of these very conservative appointments that Trump made while he was in office that were basically put in front of him by the Federalist Society. In this next election, it's going to be critical that we have someone who has a progressive mindset to appoint federal judges who serve life tenure so that they will be there to help shape many of the decisions that will govern our lives, whether it has to do with our voting rights or the environment or anything else. Many folks are not thinking about that. It's going to be critical that we hold on to the U.S. Senate, where many of these appointments are confirmed. And if that doesn't happen, we're going to be in great danger. I listen to both the right and the left, and there's already conversation on the right to federalize abortion bans, to federalize bans on what they call critical race theory, the real teaching of Black history. This is our opportunity to prevent that. And one of the dangers that I am worried about are third-party candidates. And I'm all for democracy in all of its forms, but I am concerned that by having too many folks in the race, that this potentially could hand the race to Donald Trump if he gets the election, and he will be that person deciding who gets these federal lifetime appointments to make those decisions that will shape our lives for a generation to come.
So clearly, we know that our schools are on the ballot, the courts are on the ballot, but also gun safety is on the ballot. And, this continues to be an issue that is, quite frankly, more polarizing in Congress than it polls among the American people, Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And so, Nick, talk to us about, again, how we might think about our participation in this election cycle a little bit differently than your run-of-the-mill elections, being what's at stake in the name of gun safety, not just on the federal level, but the state and local level. There's some progress that's being made around red flag laws, though not enough. But, help us to understand how we might budget our time, talent, and treasure as we head into the 24 election cycle for all of us that care so much about gun safety in this country.
As Terrence said, what happens in this presidential race is going to be so important, and there will be two very different choices to choose from, and you won't be able to escape it. I think a lot of governing is going to slow down, and we're going to be focusing a lot on the horse race at the federal level. But a lot of my energy and time right now is focusing at the state and local level. Congress is polarized, but for the first time in over 30 years, they came together across the aisle last year and had 60 senators vote for the Bipartisan Safer Community Act that's closed many loopholes in our federal gun laws and brought billions of dollars to states and localities to make our schools safer, invest in the mental health pipeline, and implement things like extremist protection orders, when properly implemented, can prevent gun violence from ever starting. But local elections matter just as much. We saw Minnesota, Supreme Court elections is going to change so many policies and set a progressive agenda. Governor Whitmer's reelection and giving her a House and a Senate, we've been able to see foundational gun laws that have been absent in this state for a very long time. We saw in Oregon at a ballot box, very strong gun laws being passed. And so while it's very important to realize the threats, I think a lot of progressives, we don't sometimes take a breath to really think about and savor our wins. And we're seeing a lot of wins when people show up to vote for progressives at the local level. And gun safety is a lot like what we're seeing with education or censorship or fascism, where the blue states are passing stronger gun laws and protecting education and funding women's rights, and the red states are continually to tear down what few gun laws we have or what fundamental rights we have as Americans. And so you have to pay attention to all levels this cycle. But if you're going to volunteer and go donate money, I would say find a local candidate you believe in, knock on some doors, and really invest in that grassroots, because that's how we're going to sustain our wins for a long period of time.
In our remaining moments, I want to ask you, what is the lesson that we should glean from the Tennessee 3? We know that the Tennessee House Republicans, the majority, they voted to temporarily silence a Democratic lawmaker, one of the members of the Tennessee 3. We saw that Representative Pearson appeared to be shoved on the floor by the Speaker of the House just today as they ended the special session to address gun safety unsuccessfully. And the session won't begin again until January. And so here we are. What lessons should activists that are working hard to usher in an era of gun safety, what lessons should they glean from Tennessee, Nick?
Justin, and Gloria taught us you have to be strong and be brave and speak up for what's right. But once you make your moment, they got a lot of followers. They were invited to the White House. But they still were like, no, I need to show up for my constituents every day, fight for my seat, fight for democracy. And they fight tirelessly every day. We're excited my colleague will be on a panel with Maxwell Frost and Justin Jones at the Congressional Black Caucus Institute coming up soon. But, every day he can be in his district, that's what he's doing, fighting the good fight.
In about a minute, Terrence, what lesson do you think we should glean from the Tennessee 3 and just the logjam in terms of advancing gun safety legislation, meaningful gun safety legislation in Tennessee?
We're in the fight for our lives, the fight for our democracy. Systemic racism is not going to just disappear. We need people like those three to put their lives, their minds, their talent on the line to fight for justice. We need more than just black faces in high places. We need people to invest in themselves, their capital, to make this happen. And together, we can accomplish this.
Together we can, and together we shall. My thanks to Terrence J. Evans, Director of Region 9 of the National Bar Association, and Nick Wilson, the Senior Director for Gun Violence Prevention at the Center for American Progress. You know, I often say on my show, A More Perfect Union, which airs right here on KBLA Talk 1580, every Sunday on the 10s, 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. Pacific time, I often say to my leaders, learners, and listeners, don't panic, organize. Do what you can from where you are with what you have. And with that, I've been sitting in for Areva Martin in real time. I'm Dr. Nicordelai Corte. More on KBLA Talk 1580 when we come forward. Thanks for listening.
Pick up the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4 only on